Keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from NetSparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Infosec World 2021 is proud to announce its keynote lineup for this year's event. Hear from Robert Herjavec, plus heads of security at the NFL, TikTok, U.S. Department Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. Plus, Security Weekly listeners save 20% off on your digital pass. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 to register today. In this segment, I'm going to take you through part 2 of the network scanning Slack bot. So basically, you run this script. It will use the Python Nmap library to scan your specified network, and it will match manufacturer name. And if you've configured a default username and password or multiple, it will attempt to log into that device with those credentials. So there's a lot of new stuff based on suggestions and just me spending more time than I probably should have on this week, but it's really fun. So I wanted to share it all with you. It's got a lot of updates since we last showed it to our audience 2 weeks ago. So this is the GitHub repo. You can get it there. It is fully open sourced, MIT licensed. Use it, abuse it, sell it for all I care. That's totally fine too. Just send me a beer or a cigar or something if you want, or not. Or use it in your network and send me pull requests because I will pay attention to those and hopefully integrate them into the finished product. So now that we've got the premise, and I talked about kind of the history of it on the last segment if you missed it, so I won't rehash it. I want to talk about what's new in this version. Command line arguments are all new in this new version, and -T lets you specify a target, so you can tell it whatever subnet you want to scan. -C, I coded for myself, so I could specify a config file that holds your usernames and passwords that you want to test for. And so when I demo it, I have like a configuration file outside of the directory that gets pushed to GitHub. And so my usernames and passwords are stored in that file. So you could have a configuration file that lives anywhere. And then I did code in, you can specify the ports. So by default, it just does 22, 23, 80, and 8080 by default. However, you can specify one or more ports. Keep in mind, the only protocols currently in this script are very limited Telnet, so just Cisco devices right now, SSH, and HTTP, not HTTPS, and only HTTP if it's basic or digest auth right now. The intern is working on extended support for post requests and things of the like, and kind of learning Python and how to intercept post requests in the process. I thought it was a good exercise for the intern. So again, in Python, really super easy. If you haven't done command line arguments in Python, it's really super easy. Like, I won't go into it during this segment, but it's really super easy, and you can see a pretty simple example of that in the code. So then some pull requests kind of broke out these functionality into multiple files and stuff like that, which was greatly appreciated. I need to do some more of that, breaking out functionality into separate files and creating some more functions for things. It is functional right now enough for me to show it tonight, but there's definitely some improvements there. Okay, so the magic happens when you call the network scanning function. So let me show you that. This right now probably has more code than should be in one particular file right now. Well, first, you know what? Let me show you the TOML file format. So what I did was, since last time, all of the credentials and vendor string or manufacturer name matches were hard-coded in the source code. So the big update is all of your strings that you want to match, where it says name equals there, in your other configuration, like the authentication type, the login URL, and all of your credentials, including multiple credentials for that vendor type, are now stored in a TOML configuration file. TOML's kind of like in between the regular configuration, like a .ini, like very basic configuration, and not quite like JSON or YAML. So it's like somewhere in between. It tries to be human readable with more advanced features than a straight regular like .ini configuration file. I thought it was appropriate for this because essentially it lets you, like, in a human way, describe like Python lists and dictionaries essentially. So you can add your credentials in there. So for example, like this first one, if the manufacturer name or vendor name is Cisco, it will try to log into that device over HTTP basic authentication using the default username admin password Cisco, and then this is a list right here. So see how those two values are the same
because of the indents.
In the indents, yep. So this will basically create a list. In my code, it's a list of, I think, a list of dictionaries of username and password pairs. So it's a dictionary, username equals admin, password equals Cisco, and then the next item in the list is another dictionary, username equals admin, password equals admin. So this will test for those credential sets, which is awesome. That was one of the, again, we took this kind of rudimentary code and we're kind of tuning it for our own needs. So I did include a bunch of other vendors in there. The other change that I made is in SSH support, and only in SSH support right now. If you put a vendor named default, if I don't match a vendor string, so as I hit a device, it says I'm Blackmagic Design or whatever, it doesn't match any of the vendors that I defined in the file, you can uncomment this and it will try these credentials against it. So this is like basically a set or multiple sets of credentials that anytime I find SSH and I don't match a specific vendor to try the default password, I'll just try this set of passwords, which was super handy. I created work for myself. By the way, when you do this on your network, dictionary? Yeah. What's that?
You've basically given it a dictionary of credentials to try on anything it sees that it's not quite sure what to do with.
Correct, Josh, correct. And my goal for this is to create very small targeted sets of dictionaries, right? I mean, there's a million utilities out there that will take in big word lists. I mean, we've all used, Medusa, Hydra, and all.
You just want known defaults.
I want known defaults or very like well-known small set of credentials to test against my network. Yeah, that was the goal for my script. There is another one out there called ChangeMe. I think that's the name of the repo. They did an amazing job, and you should definitely check it out. I borrowed some of their like concepts and ideas from that project. I need to reference them in here as well because that's a pretty good one. However, that one is only Python 2.7, I believe. Okay, so then I also did Telnet. However, Telnet's a lot more work than I thought it was going to be because with Telnet, you Telnet to the device, but then you have to read like whatever it spits back to you on the initial connection, and then interpret that, and then if it's asking for a username, give it a username and send the carriage return line feed or the enter, however you want to phrase that, right? And then it has to come back and say password, and then if it's successful or not, you have to know what that message is. So what I anticipate in this configuration file is to be descriptive, allow the user to define, hey, when you telnet to this device, like expect this string for the username, expect this string for the password, and this is success and this is failure, and have the user define that.
You know what might be actually easier? If you run this and it finds something that's on Telnet, you just have the computer punch the person.
Yeah.
You've actually missed a very important set of creds here.
What's that?
Blank.
Yes, that's the other. It's a great point, Josh. Well, so there's I think two different scenarios I want to account for. One is it doesn't ask for a username or password at all. Like just Telnet drops you into the interface, and then like a username but no password.
Ask you how you know that. Right?
Yes, because I have said device on the network today would actually be a great test for this. Yeah. So,
did you have to write your own Telnet connection handler?
I stole code from the internet for that.
So you coded in Stack Overflow.
I coded in Stack Overflow for that, and I will show you. I don't think it was Stack Overflow, but I did take.
And you didn't steal it. You merely appropriated or borrowed.
Borrowed it. Yes.
And with appropriate credit.
Yeah, I'll show you that too, because I was like, wow, that was a lot more work than I thought it was going to be for It was way more work than SSH, put it that way. So here is my code that reads the configuration file. It needs to be a little more streamlined. It's a little verbose. I need to add some functions in there and stuff. In any case,
and some comments.
My comments would help too, right? There's a couple of comments in there. This block of code right here is a whole bunch of dancing around to make sure that I can read your configuration file, right? So like if you gave me a configuration file, I want to make sure that's an actual file on the file system. I want to try and read that file. I want to handle that exception if that file should exist because I check for that first. But also if there's a parsing error, that TOML.load function will throw an exception. So I want to make sure that I trap that exception, catch that exception, and things of that nature. So then, like, if you didn't give me a configuration file, I just look for a default one called creds.toml in the same directory. And then if that doesn't exist, I throw an error. So really just some stuff around the configuration file. And then you pass this function of protocol. And then based on the protocol that you passed me, HTTP, SSH, or Telnet, I read through the configuration file and I read in all of the vendors and the credentials. That's what this code does, is it's combing through the configuration file. And then for each vendor or manufacturer you gave me, it's reading in the list of not just credentials, but the metadata about that vendor, right? The authentication type, which I'm not necessarily using authentication type right now, but I will in the future, right? Like you're going to, in the config file, tell the script how it should authenticate to the device. And then you're going to, in this line 62 and 63, is where I read in a list of dictionaries that represent the username and passwords that the user supplied. And I do that based on what protocol you sent me. And again, this code's kind of ugly. Like I did the make it work thing, go back later and make it prettier.
Paul, you should set up a GitHub with defaults, and people could add to it. And so this should just call back to the GitHub and just roll down all the default creds that it finds there. I'm sorry, just a thought.
No, I was trying not to be like the script that tested for all the defaults. I guess it's not a bad configuration though, because I do want it.
It's going to take 2 seconds. It's not a big deal.
If I can specify a config file, I guess I can make it specify a protocol and be like, hey, run this script, use this configuration file, only test for SSH, and then just populate that file from GitHub, Josh, right, with all SSH.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that way people could add as like we're getting, Tyler's dropping them into the freaking chat. Like, ooh, can you add this and can you add that?
And Paul, you could
Tyler's used a few of them,
and you could do this in multiple different ways. One, you could have it be the functionality that you wanted to do just these limited sort of things, the smaller test. But at the end of all of your tests, have it reference an include.
Yes.
And that include could be GitHub repository.
Yeah, if you want to include, Yep.
So, like, by default, just have it do the limited tests. You can add your own locally, or you could point it to someplace else to get stuff, whether it be your own private GitHub repository or a public one.
See, this makes me want to just continue working on it, because every time I show it, everyone has lots of like awesome suggestions, and we can just like keep going down this. I don't know where it ends, but we just keep going. It's fine. I like it. It's fun.
People make these things called products that eventually they might actually give away or sell. I'm just saying.
Right. It's kind of weird.
And see, I'm also seeing this of like I I got jazzed about something the other day. I reinvigorated the Ponagachi and reinstalled some Ponagachi with the latest version. And I'm like, you could totally do this. So it would read the Tomo on startup. You could just put this in a distro and you could edit the file and it would copy it over automatically for your network range. You plug it into somebody's network and it scans and gets default credentials for you. And then you walk away and then you use those later.
Oh, so awesome.
I'm looking at how Paul's parsing that config file, and he's doing this one set of a logic for Telnet, one set of logic for HQ. I'm thinking, why isn't that all just like variables?
Yeah, so it's a great point, Lee. It'll be remains to be seen exactly where this block of code is going to go, but I imagine I'm going to have different properties to describe how to log in via HTTP, SSH, and Telnet, and therefore I had those in separate kind of code blocks, right? Because we're already working on HTTP and adding in post requests, and when you do that, I'm going to need to know like if there are special header values you need me to set to that be successful and things like that. So each of these three conditional statements here are going to be more specific. Right now they look very similar, right? But they're going to be more specific. I'm going to read in different things for HTTP, SSH, and Telnet. Yeah. It's a good point, Lee. I too looked at this code block and went, I could do better. I know I could do better on there. But I wanted to get it working for this week because I put in a lot of my time in this week into it. So it made a lot of improvements I made a lot of improvements that I think people can take advantage of. The other one was the one change to HTTP request, and I really liked like taking something as a starting point and then building on top of that. And this function came from the previous code, and there was like the person had kind of started on it but not really like fleshed out all the functionality. And one thing was when he scanned for 80, 81, and 8080. But when he called HTTP request, he didn't pass in the port to the function. And I'm like, well, it doesn't matter what's running HTTP. If it's HTTP, just call the function and pass it a port, whatever port HTTP service is running on. And so that's what I did. It was pretty easy to do that. Request doesn't let you specify the port as a parameter like that. You got to kind of build it into this string right here in the GET request. So, kind of interesting. But anyway, it supports port now.
Request also do HTTPS?
That's the next thing to add, right? Is HTTPS as a service, and it'll absolutely do that. And I mean, if you're just trying to log in, you could probably skip all the certificate checking and just try and log in, right?
Well, and a lot of devices have a self-signed cert, so you really don't want to.
Yeah, you don't want to check for it anyhow. Agreed. SSH function, I added some more exception handling, and I also added this really important thing right here. Like, don't read from my SSH agent because like it breaks all kinds of stuff. I haven't dug into exactly why it breaks all kinds of stuff, but it mucks with lots of stuff. And when I was getting errors, everyone said just set allow agent equal to false, and I did that, and it started working. So like it doesn't interact with your SSH agent configuration very well. Telnet, good old Telnet, baby. So Python has a built-in library, Telnet lib. Is it built in? I don't think you have to. I think it's built into Python, I believe. So Telnet lib is pretty cool. But again, in this block of code with HTTP and SSH, like you can just try and log in. With Telnet, you have to tell it how to log in based on the responses that come back. And so what I ended up doing is retrofitting this code that I copied from somewhere, multiple places. This will only work with Cisco devices. Maybe not even all Cisco devices, but it's worked on a bunch of different Cisco devices I've tested against. Because Cisco devices, if they're configured for username and password. So this only works with Cisco devices that are configured for username and password. Specifically, will prompt you with username : password : if you enter the wrong credentials, it will say authentication failed. Other systems may say something different, like login failed, login unsuccessful. So you have to account for that with Telnet. Then the command, right? show ver is the command that I'm running to test if I actually did log in. So again, very specific. A lot more work needs to go into the telnet function to make it more robust.
I'm surprised you had to encode it as UTF-8. I thought telnet was straight ASCII.
Yeah, that came from a coded example, Lee, and I'm not quite sure why. That was in a lot of the examples, was to
and it worked
to do that,
so
and it works. Yeah.
weird.
Okay, so the network scan. So this is where I added a lot more functionality. Well, this is where I implement the functionality that I think I've talked about, right? Most of this hasn't changed. Again, I added a lot more exception handling to the script. And I load the credential databases here, right? So call my function to load all of the credentials. I store those in, so these end up being lists of dictionaries, and the dictionaries have lists in them. Yes. Python data structures are awesome for stuff like this because I can mix types in lists and dictionaries. So I can read in a bunch of data and store it, provided I can keep it in my head exactly how I've done that. Then I go through all of the hosts that we found in the Nmap scan, and I create a dictionary to store all the stuff that I find out about the host that I'm trying to log in with, that I've already scanned. So I store the IP address, I added the host name, I store the vendor string. That hasn't changed. And then for all of the ports, I loop through all of the open ports that were found in the scan, and I store the state, open or closed, and I store the name. And the name is the service. And this is just the generic name that Nmap gives to the service. This is not the version from version fingerprinting, lowercase s, capital V. I think there might be some limitation in the Nmap library where it's not storing that information from the version string, because I tried to pull it and it was blank, even though my Nmap scan was collecting it. So that's what I went with for now. So if the port is open, I match the service. So if it was HTTP, right, I pull the creds, I log in as HTTP with HTTP. If it's SSH, I try and match the vendor, which is this line 276. Match the vendor, and then if the vendor matches, I try the vendor specific credentials here, and then if the vendor doesn't match and the vendor is default, then I try your list of default credentials, which was actually really handy. And then that's it for that. So yeah, I mean, you can see, I mean, if you want to go to the GitHub repo and you're thinking about using TOML, it's a pretty good example of using a TOML configuration file. I've seen other examples of TOML that like describe the data in the syntax for a Python list, which is actually kind of handy. I wanted a little more human readable format. So I updated all of the documentation. So I have documentation now, Larry. I don't have releases and branches. That's coming soon.
Hey, but you got documentation, big, and you know what? You closed the open issue for
I did.
Black. See,
I think I closed all my open issues and integrated all of my pull requests.
You have 2 issues that are there, though.
Yeah, but those, I think I addressed all those in the latest release, and I just got to go close those out.
See, when you do a push, you can actually have it close an issue.
Yeah, I know. I need to. I could be using Git way more efficiently.
Yep.
It's actually, I really like doing this project because I'm using Git and.
Don't worry, I don't remember how to do it either. So
yeah,
I'd have to Google it.
That's one of those, that's Git in a nutshell. I don't remember how to do it, so I had to Google it.
Yep.
But yeah, it's helping me learn how to use Git to construct a project like this, because like I've used Git in more of a CI/CD pipeline for enterprise software, which is a very different use case than doing like an open source project. So this has been a lot of fun for me, and hopefully people use this and get some value out of it. So you do need to create a config.py that will hold your Slack channel information. So this will send a message out to Slack, and I updated the output format, Larry, which I think you'll really like.
Nice.
I did, you saw my conditional statements for debugging in there. So you can turn debug on or off. Right now, it's just on or off, and if it's on, it's quite a bit of debugging kind of stuff.
If you turn debugging on, can it send out those debugging messages with ASCII art of your choosing?
I can work on that.
A la PPWorks?
I can, submit a pull request for that.
Sure. Can do.
I described the how to do the configuration file, set the defaults, which I covered already, and then we get to the example output. So this is output that if debugging's on, goes to the screen, and each one of these lines, if it has a vulnerability, will be... Can I click that? Nope, that's copy. I thought it would break out the window. Now I had to scroll. That's okay. So IP address, host name, the vendor, ports is a list of open ports. And then if a port, I was able to log in on a port, I list, this is what was missing originally, right? I list which port I was able to log in and the credentials that I logged in as. Now, obviously, you want to keep this information in a private Slack channel. Or not. Mm-hmm. Or, maybe uncomment the Slack channel stuff if you're scanning sensitive things that you don't want to be sent over a network to a Slack server somewhere. And all of these, you can be written out to the screen, and it's also saved in a text file when you run the script. What's also nice is in the logic inside the code, now I can identify multiple vulnerabilities on the same host. So if I was able to log in via Telnet using credentials, and on this host, I was able to log in on port 80 with some default credentials as well. So it'll actually tell you if multiple services have vulnerabilities, which did not exist previously either. So I think it's pretty usable now. Obviously, we could just keep going on this for probably a really long time and adding more and more. Every time I work on it, I'm like, oh, I could add functionality for this and add functionality for that. So, I mean, if you have suggestions, you want to submit pull requests, you want to submit issues, that's cool. I'll get to them as soon as I can. Probably maybe in a few more weeks, we'll do another segment on the, kind of next round of stuff, and we'll all learn about Python and scanning and security stuff using this as kind of an example.
So remind me, on the SSH test, are you tracking the host keys, or are you just ignoring them and accepting?
Ignoring and accepting, and or reading my local ones. I forget which option. That's an option.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. There's more stuff I could do with that. Yeah, so I auto add this line right here, which you shouldn't necessarily. I mean, it is a security. There is like a warning,
right? So
I add it, right? But you can, and that would be some further options that I would want to add. Lee, is like, hey, tell me how you want to handle the SSH key thing. Like, do you want to give me a keychain that I can read from, and I only test hosts that are in, that host key file that you give me? Yeah, so that's definitely an option. Again, this was
also interesting to say, hey,
Paul,
look what
you
showed
need
up.
to check Discord, because Tyler is trying to turn your tool into an attack tool.
I mean,
I'm intending this for both red team and blue team use. Totally fine. That's totally fine with me. I can see both camps using this tool, right? You want to bundle this, inside of your C2 thing, be it, have it a payload that you download that scans the internal network. That's a great usage for this tool because, as we know, we've got a lot of tools at our disposal for scanning for default credentials. But when you're on a network, and 1, you don't want to be too noisy. 2, you got a large network scan. And 3, you don't want to spend a day or 2 or weeks scanning. Just like, look, find these very specific devices with these very specific credentials. They don't have to be default. If you're in an organization, you may have already picked up some credentials to go, hey, they like to use this username and password on these kind of devices. Let me go find all of them, or similar devices with similar credentials. That's exactly what, this tool should be used for.
I'm going to make a
Discord channel.
What's that? Sorry, you guys were talking at the same time.
Go ahead, Tyler.
I said I'm going to make a CNA script for this for Cobalt Strike. We're trying to port it to C# right now.
There you go.
Nice.
There you go. My other thinking is...
it looks like Tyler's going to write some modules for you.
There you go. So my like pretty high up on my priority list is I want to add RDP support. So there is a Python library for RDP that people say works pretty well from what I've read.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to integrate that into it as well. I mean, there's also a lot of other tools that, you know, do RDP scanning, but why not?
While you're at it, you should do RDP, VNC, and what's the other one? That
MySQL, Postgres.
No, I was thinking more remote desktop type service.
Tight VNC, the full VNC client.
No, there's another one.
TeamViewer. I need the RMMs. Are you talking about or what?
TeamViewer would be a good one, but that one might be a little bit more difficult. There's another one, and I know Tyler is like, I can feel Tyler trying to do the mind meld with me. Works on Android, iOS, macOS, Windows, Linux. Client server support for all of them. The executable is sitting on my desktop on my work machine, so it's not here. So like, no.
IntelliDisplay, VNC, RD Gateway, RDP.
None of those.
Secure CRT.
Wow, that brings back memories.
Throwing
That was
shit
the
against the
client,
wall
yeah.
now, right? Yeah. It'll come up with it. It's all right. No big deal.
I mean, I'm thinking. I would imagine it wouldn't be too hard to start looking for default community strings for SNMP. But then if you start dumping the MIB, it'd be kind of a bitch to deal with.
Tyler, that one.
What one?
IPMI.
PMI?
Oh yeah, that'd be a good one to add. If you want to come back to my screen, some awesome people created a default credential scanner. They called it ChangeMe. Their architecture is really awesome. Like in terms of software architecture, it's light years ahead of what I'm creating. And you know, they've got the Creds in GitHub, Josh, as you mentioned, right? Each one has its own YAML. They're using YAML as the configuration file format. And they've just got some amazing code in there. I believe this is Python 2.7 though.
Does it actually do scanning, or does it? Because it looked like it was just a single IP there in that example.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it does the actual scanning or if you're just going to give it one host. Good question.
Yeah, I'll take it was one host there. So
yeah. But this was one close that I found, and I wanted to give them props because you know, I reviewed their code and their architecture and kind of borrowed some concepts from it. So I got to put them as a kind of a reference in there. So they did really nice work.
Nice.
And this dude's got some other projects in here and stuff too. Definitely check it out. So this one's called ChangeMe. If you go to github.com/ZT Grace is the main developer. And they presented at Black Hat Arsenal and stuff. Something like that. Yeah. Yeah. It's good project.
Piece of cake.
Cool. So yeah, send me suggestions, pull requests, and I'll work on them at my leisure. No promises. It's open source, right?
In your spare time.
In my spare time. If I can like make it in a technical segment, that can be my time. If I'm just working on it, that's my spare time. Those sprints are gonna go much slower. Put it that way. So
I keep thinking there are more and more repositories of things like default passwords, default credentials, or compromised credentials. There's got to be a way to just suck those in, not carry them around trying to create them.
Sure.
But your scan could take for freaking ever if you're not careful.
That's why I like the light, fast, you know, you're just going to put in a few credential kind of thing.
Watch Tyler build you the credential fuzzer that's like 16 hours per IP now.
Could do that too.
We're just going to brute force everything.
Brute force all the things. Alrighty, that concludes this technical segment. You can find all the code at github.com/securityweekly/net slackbot. with that, we'll take a short break, come back with the news for this week. Stay tuned.